Yeah, it is.
All right, we're going to start then. So,
Okay, good.
financial cybersecurity. Your retirements aren't as secure as you thought.
Oh.
Yeah, unfortunate, I know.
Tell her.
So, disclaimer, educational purposes only. I'm not a lawyer, even if I sound like one. I am, however, an investment advisor representative. I will use the term IRA, which is a registered investment advisor, interchangeably. IRA is the firm, the representative is the actual person. And again, you're not clients. This is not financial advice, no matter what I say, et cetera, et cetera. Overview. Yeah. We're going to do a little introduction. I'm going to give you a financial crash course on the history of how we got to the dollar from the gold standard. Little fun little bits there. I have the electrical vehicle credits out of the new Inflation Reduction Plan for tomorrow. I can go over that stuff today if you guys are interested in that, or I'll skip it. That's a general open question. Would you guys actually like to see that, or you want me to skip it for you? Say that again? Okay. Then we're going to go over institutional security and then answer the question, are your investments safe? CC by SA. That is a Creative Commons license, buy, share alike. It pretty much means anything in this slide or in this deck, you're welcome to reuse if you need to for any of your own purposes. Things that are explicitly not covered in this presentation are logos, trademarks like that. That one's my company. Taglines and anything else associated with a company like this, or any of those. None of those are actually in there. I just keep the slide because I don't feel like changing it. Normally, this talk is given in the very, very early morning. However, it's after lunch. So we're going to skip this a little bit, and it's going to be red eye audience participation. That is the little image that has been sitting in that bottom left-hand corner the entire time. That eye is actually made up of ones and zeros. There's things in front of you all the time you're not necessarily aware of until you're shown them. That's me. Things about me. I'm the owner of SCI, which is a cybersecurity firm. We do pen testing, security awareness training, et cetera, et cetera. Started first business in the finance sector at 19. 19, I also got a personal training certification, national speaker, mostly security topics. Purchased a restaurant back in 2016. I've since sold it. I have minor acting and production credits. That's what the previous picture was for. And I've passed a Series 65. I've done a lot of stuff pretty much. What that Series 65 and why that's important for this presentation is it pretty much means that I can give financial legal advice or financial advice, planning, take care of assets, et cetera. So, you know, that the information coming to you is accurate. Again, you are not clients in any way, shape, or form. And that's the one I passed. All right. Woo. IRA versus broker dealers. IRAs, we have a fiduciary duty. Broker dealers are stockbrokers, more or less. So stockbrokers buy and sell stocks. The difference is that a fiduciary responsibility means that I have legal requirements to clients to always act in their best interests. So just because somebody is buying or selling stocks for you does not mean that they are legally required to act in your best interest. That's the difference between a stockbroker and an IRA. You have a stockbroker, actually check to make sure if they're an IRA or not. Something for everyone. Raise your hands if you've had any cybersecurity or financial training relating to investments. Beautiful. Investment retirement accounts a bank manages, like a 401k, 403bs, et cetera. Ones you manage yourself, checking and savings account. Good, because you know what? Something in here is for you. Now we get into the nice little history of the banking system in and of itself. Fractional lending and currency creation. So they are created because not all deposits are needed at once. Banks, US banks specifically, have a 10-to-1 ratio. What that means is for every $100 that is being lent out or given to them as a deposit, the bank can lend out 1,000. Every loan that the bank makes is creating money out of thin air in the form of debt. That money does not actually exist somewhere. And the byproduct of that is that it continuously increases the money supply. New currency creation creates the net devaluation of all of the existing currency. So anytime a bank makes a loan, anytime the money printer at the Fed goes burr, your dollar goes down in its actual worth and purchasing power. So that's what I just said. When the total money supply is increased, it means that the dollars that you currently have are much less valuable. The Bretton Woods Conference was in July 1944. World War II is still going on. There's 730 delegates. There are 44 allied nations. It is in New Hampshire, and it creates what will be the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and later becomes part of the World Bank. This also secures America's economic future and rise to global dominance, this particular conference. This wasn't a forethought necessarily by the American government, what ended up happening is we realized afterwards that there were an absolute enormous amount of destruction that had happened in Europe in general, and that there were going to be some funds or other way in which to help the Europeans rebuild. So one of their main purposes is rebuilding after the war. Promote stability of exchange rates and financial flow of capital. That seems like a bunch of gobbledygook, but if you actually get down into the weeds, it makes a lot of sense. It pretty much means that things should be available. The way that they did this is they made an adjustable pegged Forex. Forex just means a foreign exchange market. It's typically dollars. That's why, for example, Bitcoin is classified as a commodity and not as a currency, because if it is classified as a currency, they cannot tax it. It's classified as a commodity, they can. The other things that fall into commodities are oil, gold, silver, pretty much tangible goods. The exchange is pegged to the gold, sort of. It's actually pegged to something called a gold convertible currency. So a 1 troy ounce at that time is 35 US dollars. Harry Dexter White, which was the senior US official and the genius behind the term gold convertible currency. At this time in the world, America controls approximately 2/3 of the world's global gold supply and is the only one that is still directly convertible to gold. The reason being is because during World War II, again, we don't have debt-based economies really at this point in terms of our currency exchanges. So as the French and the British and everybody else starts to pay for war goods and other things, they have gold. Instead of taking the gold and transferring it between their banks, America said, why don't you send us and pay us your gold so we can change them around? We'll move them from deposit to deposit. And this is actually still what currently happens in terms of a lot of foreign reserve currencies. They actually just get moved from one bank vault to another. So again, America controls 2/3 of the world's gold supply at this point. That's why the term gold convertible currency was so useful, because what this actually does is it pegged the gold to a dollar, aka it was gold convertible. So our dollar was convertible. And instead of giving them the gold, we gave them the dollar instead, hence making it a gold convertible currency. So from gold to debt, this is the Triffin dilemma. The global reserve currency comes into question because a country is running deficits to fill a supply. That is like what America does. The reason America maintains such a large deficit is because we are one of the largest consumers, period, our nation. Because we are the reserve currency, that also means that in order for us to make sure there are enough dollars going outside of the United States, we have to run a deficit because we are sending those dollars overseas. So if they want to use our dollars, that means that we need to make sure that there's enough available. That's why when people say about our huge deficits and other things like that, unless you're an economist, there's a lot of nuanced interpretation of that, whereas a deficit in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when your interest payments and other things outstretch your ability to pay that it becomes an issue. So as deficits accumulate, the reserve becomes less desirable, and hence the positions become threatened. 1913 Federal Reserve Act, citizens can no longer convert dollars to gold. So before, you used to have a dollar, you could actually go to your bank, you could get it converted for silver, you could get it converted to gold. In 1913, that stopped. 1971, Nixon actually ends the gold dollar convertible currency. So this had pretty much already been happening for a while. He just officially did it at that point. And the reason being is because of the war that we were in at the time. France was actually realizing that we might have been printing more money than what was still being held in our gold vaults. Yeah. So instead, if France and then everyone else had started asking for all of their gold back, it would have started to deeply affect the economy and our positions at the time. So instead, that's when he decided to fully end the conversion for it. US dollar becomes a fiat currency, which means it doesn't have an intrinsic value. Anything that has an intrinsic value would be something that you can actually use. So gold can be used for copper or conductors and other things. Anything that has a value to it, other than just because you believe. A fiat literally means pretty much belief in the currency that it is worth something of value. Fiat is Latin for let it be done, aka an arbitrary order of decree. And that actually comes from sovereigns pretty much issuing an order and pretty much just saying, let it be done. That's where the term fiat comes from. And then it's faith-based. So the almighty dollar remains the primary reserve currency for the entire world. All of the commodities, more or less, are all traded in US dollar. It's something like 80% of global trade is currently conducted in US dollars. So that's the entire rest of the world more or less using our currency. Obviously, there are some competitors who would like to take our place as it, but I'll go over briefly in a second why there's no real alternative but the US dollar. So the US maintains a strong economy, which is one of the prerequisites, because if that's not there, then your dollar is pretty much worthless. Like in the case of Venezuela, they end up just printing so much money that they had hyperinflation. Their dollars pretty much became worthless, which is why people started using the US dollar in its place. Same type of thing after Germany had hyperinflation when it lost World War I and it couldn't pay its debt, so it just kept printing money. There's that very classic image of a woman with a wheelbarrow full of money that she was pushing around, and that wasn't even enough to buy a loaf of bread. So that's what happens when you have hyperinflation and everything pretty much goes out the window. The US has the most traded currency. In 2019, oh, there you go, 88% of the global trade was denominated for the international bank settlements. So that is a lot of trade being conducted in the US dollar. And many other countries, they maintain vast reserves of it because of the large percentages of commodities that are also priced in dollars. AKA, oil is pretty much the basis upon which we have built our modern economies as an energy source. So oil is all traded in dollars more or less. There was a recent issue where China has long wanted to replace the US as a global superpower and has decided that it would like to try and have its currency as a replacement. The problem with that is that the Chinese have lots of manipulation in their currency. And so in order to affect it, it is useful to be able to manipulate your currency in certain ways. The way that they do that is they keep their exports very low priced in order to make them competitive in the market. So that's an artificial stimulus into their market. When Russia and China, because there's a war in Ukraine going on right now, for anyone who is not aware, it's still happening. When they thought about changing their value for some of the oil that they were receiving from China and Russia, the Russians converted some of the currency into Chinese yen, I believe it is. And when they went to convert it back, the Chinese were like, no, we're not actually going to take our money back. That's a problem. The US pretty much has so much available that it's very easy to flow in and out. If you have a reserve currency like the dollar, if I am a Canadian company and I need to do business in the Eurozone, well, I can either A, convert it into francs or euros or Canadian dollars or whatever it happens to be, or we can both agree on an intermediary, which is the US dollar. So it makes the actual trading across global lines much easier. Countries who currently use the US dollar as their actual currency, Ecuador, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, a quasi-currency, which means that it is accepted for most transactions, would be those ones. And in Panama, it's actually legal tender 1-for-1. So you can use a Panamanian dollar or peso, or you could use a USD dollar. Inflation. Inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and services. It is calculated using the Consumer Price Index. Then the CPI measures the average change in a basket of consumer goods and services. Typically, this is grocery store items like milk, butter, etc. The thing that is not included in there is the core. So not everything across the global lines are included. And the reason being is energy prices, for example, fluctuate a lot. So those things are not actually included in the core CPI for what measures inflation. Inflation can be measured in a lot of various different ways. When you have inflation, it reduces your purchasing power. So the government aims, in order to stabilize our growth, at a 2 to 3% annual inflation. What that essentially means, and by the way, these are from the US Labor Bureau labor statistics. What that essentially means is that every single year, if the government is aiming for 2 to 3% inflation annually, that the dollar in your pocket has 2 to 3% less purchasing power. So those are the numbers for the past few years. 1.4% inflation in 2020, 7% in 21, and 8% in 22. What that essentially means is that your money is worth a sixth less than it was 3 years ago. The money in your pocket, in your bank account, is literally has a sixth less purchasing power than it did 3 years ago. So, covered it to their global reserve currency. When the US government increases its money supply and causes inflation, everyone who holds the dollar experiences this. So it's not just you whose purchasing power is less, it's also every single other person who is using that dollar. Because we are the reserve currency, that also means that our inflation is actually spread out across the globe. Anytime we print money, it not only affects us, it affects every other country. And foreign countries, they can partially interact this by adjusting their exchange rates. So pretty much, if they see that the dollar is going one way or the other, they can attempt to adjust their own rate to the dollar in relation in order to counteract the inflationary pressures. So, hot tips from an IRA, aka the most important slides by far. And I do mean by far. One of the things that people consider is if you don't already have a financial planner or you think you don't need one, just go get some financial planning, because even if you are very well versed in your stuff, it's very useful to just have someone look over your stuff in order to see if you're on the right path. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, is provide value $1,000 to $2,000 mistake at a time. These ones are for free for you guys because I like you. Without fail, almost all households, and I do mean all, are making a mistake that is costing them at least $2,000 a year, 160 plus over their lifetime. And that's a very conservative estimate. If you're not actually trained in the financial industry, there's a lot of stuff where you could be maneuvering your money to work better for you. Interest rates have been depressed near zero since 2007, but they're increasing. As Rebecca stated, with the bond issues, the issues is that as bonds and interest rates are at an inverse relationship, which means when one goes up, the other one goes down. So that's why as interest rates have continued to increase, there's been the bond problems, hence also sparking the additional problems in the banks. Savings accounts, money markets, CDs, they're also increasing in their interest rates. So as of 2/23, the average savings accounts were paying 0.35%, and a high yield money market for some reason is not showing up, but that is 4.55%. They actually have gone up slightly since then because this was last month, and they've gone up another like 0.25 or something like that, or 0.2. So this is the most important slide. This is actually from I don't have that one here. Let me actually just come over here for this one. It doesn't look like much of my audience is under 35, but these are the average saving rates for checking accounts, savings accounts, and money markets that an individual under 35 has, which is 11,400. Over 35 is 57,200. This is actually taken from a spreadsheet that I give my clients. There's a lot more underneath of it. This was the important part that actually does all the calculations for them. What that pretty much means is APR 1 and 2, you can plug in an APR rate, and it'll calculate out what your lifetime differences are. So this is balance 1. So if you're under 35, that's 11,400. 365 days in a year, 10-year interest, 20, 50, and 100. So at balance 1, 11,400 at 0.35, which is what most banks are currently paying people. This is what your interest is going to be over the year. So just that difference, and that's a very simple indication. The rates have historically been depressed. If you have it, you need to go home and check what your rates you're getting right now is, because you're losing money. You're leaving it on the table right now if you haven't looked at it. Now, since most of you, I'm assuming, are over 35, and that's approximately what you have, over your 50 or 100 years, that's the difference between $438,000 or $4,800,000. Just between what you're currently getting, because again, these are current estimates, between what you could be getting from your bank, or just moving into a high yield savings, money market, something like that. So congratulations, I just saved you $2,000 to $160,000. Yeah, I got enough time to cover those. So, Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law August 2022. That's the information of where these credits come from in case you actually want to look them up for yourselves. If you want to buy an EV, I would highly recommend checking them out because this will save you quite a bit of money on them. It is called the CVC, which is the Clean Vehicle Credit. And the credit is pretty much IRS parlance for a dollar-to-dollar reduction. So a CVC of $100 will reduce the tax bill of $1,000 to $900. Very simple. But it will not reduce your tax bill below zero. So it's not an actual rebate. The maximums for them, $4,000 for a used car. The credit equals 30% of the sale price up to $4,000. $7,500 for a new one. $2,917 for the battery capacity of at least 5 kilowatt hours. Plus $417 for each kilowatt over. So pretty much the longer range that you have, the more you're actually going to get back, or save rather. This is where the next ones come from, which is the portion on used ones in particular. The used restrictions, I didn't include everything because these would have been some really long slides if I included everything, but I gave you the majority of the hard points here coming up. The purchase price of an EV or fuel cell vehicle is $25,000 or less. This again is for the used restrictions. So if you want to buy a used one, car's got to cost $25,000 or less. Purchase made from a dealer, aka no private sales. Vehicle is bought for personal use, not for resale. And you cannot be the original owner. So you can't be the owner and then sell it to yourself. Also, by the way, if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them at any point in time. Huh? Ooh, it depends. Are you actually married to her, number one? And are you guys filing together? Yeah. Then no. But if it could be a common law marriage or something like that, then you probably could do that. You could sell it to your daughter. Yeah. You also can't be claimed as a dependent. So as long as she is not being claimed as a dependent, then you're good. And you also cannot have claimed the credit within the past 3 years. Your AGI cannot exceed 150 for married, 1,012, 500 for the heads of the household, and $75,000 for single and everybody else. These are the new ones that are just coming into effect this year. So new purchases, if you want the full list, you can check the ones above. I will provide my slide deck too on the website. So if you want to, you can pull the stuff out. This one is available to both businesses and individuals. The other one was only available to individuals. Purchase for own use, same thing. The vehicles have to now undergo final assembly in the United States. Yeah. There's also a lot of other manufacturer restrictions that are going to be on their side that you're not going to see. They're going to be transparent to you, but it includes things like battery sourcing, production capacity, and a lot of other stuff. They're pretty much using this as a way to help transition into more greener technologies, as well as making our supply chains sturdier. AKA, they're bringing them back home more or less. And CHIPS Act, so Intel's coming back. TSMC is got a new facility going up. Yep. Battery capacity, at least 7 kilowatt hours. More of them. Vehicle manufacturers, MSRPs cannot exceed $80,000 for vans, sports utilities, pickup trucks, and $55,000 for other vehicles. So you're not going to be able to get this credit if you're purchasing a $100,000 vehicle. And then those are the adjusted gross incomes if you want to get these checked or credits.
There's no graduation over like the other one where it was something per kilowatt over then.
Let me go back for these. Yeah, so the used actually have, I think the new ones are actually too. Yeah, so it's 7,500 for up to, so it's 2,917 for the first 5, and then you get 417 for every kilowatt after that.
But max that at 7,500.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So that slide when you said 7,500.
Yeah, that was the cap.
Okay.
So I included these because it's probably good information to know. This is the federal credits that are also available that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act, but are not necessarily related to EVs. So these are energy credits if you want to green your home, if you want to become more energy efficient. The whitehouse.gov energy website, very, very, very simple interactive little thing that will just show you like, these are the certain things that you can do. These are the credits that are available to you. So up to 30% applies for solar systems, as well as standalone batteries installed without solar. So it used to just be for solar systems. They've now expanded it to the standalones as well. 30% credit for energy efficient heat pumps, newer appliances, things that are going to pretty much be energy efficient and save you money. Up to $1,200 each year for adding insulation for windows and doors. So for example, if you have multiple windows you want to replace, spread them out over the next few years, because you can only get up to a $1,200 for this particular year.
Certain level window or certain level of appliance.
So there will actually be like a restriction on what they are. Again, I didn't include them in here because if I went really, really deep down, it would have been, but it's pretty much, actually, I think it's nope, it's on the next slide. So there's actually a $150 credit you can get for a home auditor to come in, and they will actually tell you what the best options are as well. So you'll get a $150 credit off of whatever the inspection estimate is as well. Special credit for up to $2,000 for electric heat pumps that provide very efficient heating and cooling. And heat pumps, more or less, the way that they work is they actually have both functions, so they can pretty much heat and cool as opposed to one or the other.
Does it come off of your taxes? With these energy credits?
Yeah, so which I think I'll actually end up getting to in the next one. So I also have some specific for New Jersey. For the New Jersey specific credits, when you go to the dealership, at point of sale is actually when you get the credits. These would typically be at the end of the year, unless your solar supplier or where you're buying it, it directly is giving them to you otherwise at the point of sale.
Oh, so they don't down off of the price?
So again, if you're going to a dealership and you're buying a car, they should be giving you these credits at the point of sale. Yeah, those will come off on the end of your next tax cycle. So you've already been paying the money. Yeah. Yep.
So there'll be questions to ask.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I said unless whoever the supplier is specifically gives them to you ahead of time.
Okay.
Households up to $4,000. That's per year, while low incomes can get up to $8,000. The $150 credit for the inspectors. Low moderate income households, they can access up to 100% rebates for the cost of actually installation, as well as some of these other things. So if you know anybody who falls into these categories, they pretty much want to make sure that you are able to heat your home in the winter. They want to make sure that you're not going to die of heat stroke in the summer. So if you know anybody who needs these programs, definitely point them in the direction. Some specific New Jersey ones. 100% sales tax exemption on zero emissions vehicles, not hybrids. So that if you lease or purchase a electric car in New Jersey, you do not have to pay sales tax on it, period. Which can be quite a substantial amount of money. So I do not know in Pennsylvania. They could. I live in Jersey too, so sorry if you guys are in Pennsylvania. There's a program called Charge Up New Jersey, which is $4,000 for the purchase or lease of EVs, including battery electric and plug-in hybrids. So this one actually applies to both. The sales tax, only electric. And the vehicle price has to be under $55,000. Purchase must be from a dealership. And this is what I was saying about the money actually being received at the point of sale for New Jersey specifically. And you get a $200 rebate for a home charger. Mm-hmm. So some interesting ones is that if you have an electric vehicle, you can actually use the HOV lane. Mm-hmm. You also can get a discount for the Easy Pass. 10% off the full fare for the New Jersey Turnpike and Garden State Parkway. And in order to achieve that, they have to have at least 45 miles and meet the California super low standards. And then there's a lot of different programs that the New Jersey in particular offers for businesses who are installing infrastructure, aka charging stations, commercial businesses. It Pays to Plug In is the name of one of their programs. There's actually a lot of them. I didn't want to include them here because it's already getting a little deep on the credits. So now we're going to discuss some of the lovely things about banks. About making secure passwords. So what makes up a secure passphrase? Because you should never have a password. That's a terrible idea, especially if it is a dictionary word that is singular or anything else along those lines. Entropy is actually what makes up a password in terms of how difficult it is to crack. So entropy is the measure of disorder in the system, aka the randomness of the system. So which is easier to remember? That or the bank robber cow jumped over the moon with 100 bags full of cash? Because although the second one is much, much easier to remember, that makes it a passphrase. And even though it is mostly made up of dictionary words, the entropy on it is so long that it would take a ridiculous amount of time to actually try and crack that. So if you have something that is 8 characters and they're random, there's things called salted tables. So pretty much they pre-compute all the hashes. They pretty much make it from an actual brute force attack into a lookup table instead, which pretty much is very rainbow tables. They pretty much make it extremely easy for people to actually just look up what the password is. So again, if you have shorter passwords, make them into passphrases instead. So KeePass, you were asking about password managers. KeePass is the one I like. It's an offline database. Every time I go to use my password, I have to open it up, throw it in, and then close it when I'm done. KeePass Droid and Mini KeePass, those are both the iOS versions. They're not official ones. There also is a KeePass XC, I believe it is, which is a different branch, free and open source software. Again, as long as you are actually using a password manager of some kind, you're already significantly ahead of the competition. Who would I not recommend? So here's the thing. Number one, I'm always going to recommend an offline database over an online one, period. Because that means it's local to your device. You're not going to be sharing that. Assuming that you haven't actually been compromised, even if they get your device, they're not going to have the password to it. And your master password should be strong enough that it will be able to resist attack. So that's number one. However, there are situations where, let's say that you are sharing passwords across an enterprise or something like that, and your employees need to have access into it. You're kind of like what you said, it's useful to be able to have something that you can share and then add on a few extra digits or whatever at the end. So my personal password is over 100 characters just to enter into my laptop. That's not my actual password for when I need to do like an admin activity. In addition to that entire passphrase, I actually have another 16 random characters that I've just memorized on top of that. So that's the best way to make sure that you're not going to have it. If you have an online database, you want to make sure that the company preferably has been third-party audited. So they actually have an outside security firm come in and review their stuff and say that it is what they say that it is. LastPass recently had the issue where their salting functions weren't as high as they should have been. So the iterations that were pretty much going on weren't accurately being represented. So number two is whatever you're using, make sure you try and learn just a little bit about it if you're tech inclined. If not, find the person who is tech inclined and have them look at it. Make sure that what you're giving to people is, number one, accessible. Because if it's not accessible, they're not going to use them. If it's not easy to do, they're not going to use it. It's the classic security versus convenience trade-off. So for each individual person or company, you need to make how many people do I have in my company? How many people actually need access to various different things? Because you might actually want something where your admins have a completely separate set of access accounts than everybody else does. Because that actually helps to separate out and secure your facilities better. So again, I'm not going to shame anybody in particular here. What I would recommend is whoever you are actually looking at, make sure that you actually do the research on them and don't just go for the first one. That's my recommendation for it.
A question for you.
Yes.
When there's a two-factor for a company, have you come across any services that reliably work with like a shared company phone number, like to a department where anytime somebody log in somewhere, everybody gets pinged at the same time, so that they're able to get in, other than assigning the two-factor to Joe's phone and then Joe's out for the day and no one can get into their account.
Yep. So it's funny that you asked that because multi-factor is literally the next slide in here. And I'm actually going to show a website that has a full list of companies all across the internet, what two-factor they offer, what different things. So for example, if they're using SMS, if you're actually able to do time-based passcodes. So we're going to cover that in literally 2 seconds. In terms of what you're asking in particular, though, the only way around that is to actually either have the access set up in a way that it's coming into somebody either in your company or on their end and it's assigned to the appropriate person. It's pretty much a cluster, unfortunately. That is the reality of the situation. So either A, you have to set up separate accesses, or B, you need to let everybody know. The nice thing about, so on one of my engagements, one of the only times that I was caught every single time was the way that they had their admin team set up, is that absolutely nobody had administrative access on that period, on that network. Whenever one of them needed to do something in their team meeting, they would say, this is what I need. I'm going to be on it for this long. And anytime the escalation of privileges happened, every single person on that team would get a message. So what that meant is that if one of the admins was compromised and the bad guy went to escalate, that everybody else on the team would be like, hey, you didn't request access at this particular time. Did you need it for something? And they could respond back, oh, yes, I forgot, or something like that. Because no one by default had admin privileges on that. That was one of the only times where it was extremely difficult to actually compromise them. So what you're saying about having it sent to everybody, it is useful from a certain perspective to actually know when other people are logging into those accounts, especially if they might be financial accounts or whatever information is valuable to your specific company. So that might actually be a positive as opposed to a negative. Now, the lockout thing, on the other hand, that needs to be taken care of, because that just means that whoever is assigned that particular role or that phone, it needs to be accessible so that somebody can retrieve it.
Right, yeah. You know, sites that do SMS. And then part of the FCC, I just read about where for the a lot of void numbers and
Yep.
I go back to the FCC, but I didn't know about that. Yeah, so it's
Yeah, it's one of those things that definitely is difficult because of the widespread prevalence of SMS really becoming a factor in the authentication process, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. I'm actually going to move on to the next ones because I think you're going to actually get some information out of them. And then the difference between LastPass, KeePass, one's the local database, one's online. So multi-factor, something you know, something you are, and something you possess. Those are the three factors. Examples would be your bank card or your PIN, a cell phone, SMS, a fingerprint, password, iris scan. And then you have free OTPs, is what I like to use. You could use Google Authenticator, Authy. They all provide the same functions. You're either getting a time-based one-time password, or you're getting a hash one. So that's pretty much what token authentication does. The nice thing about that is, number one, for the most part, they'll change every 30 seconds. And the only thing that needs to be established is the initial connection and then the time of day. What's the date? That's the only thing that your phone needs to know after that point, and the server needs to know. So it makes it very simple in terms of actually back-end infrastructure for how to do that implementation. I, honest to God, have no idea why more companies have not implemented some of this stuff, because it is not super hard to do. And it's one of the most secure options. And then, of course, you have hardware devices. So you can actually have a hardware stick that you put in, authenticates. So that's one of the other examples. That would be something that you possess. So some of their institutional security ranges from excellent to absolutely laughable. Most large banks somewhere in their systems are using decrepit payment processing and other systems. So you imagine your bank is this super secure vault, or you'd like to, when in reality, for the most part, they've got some really nasty stuff hiding in their closets. NIST, as we were discussing earlier, explicitly recommends not changing your passwords. Not to do that. That was something that they, again, changed relatively recently. So if you're changing your passwords frequently, or you have a company who is telling you to do it, or your bank is telling you to do it, you should tell them that they're not currently following the correct standards. Limiting password length. Another one of those things that I have no idea why banks in particular do this, because past a certain point, like, it's really, really not that hard to actually just extend the length for allowing someone's password, and makes it so much more secure. I've come into situations where a bank will limit the password length to like 20 characters. I'm like, that there's absolutely no reason to do that, especially if you want security. And then, yeah, offering subpar multi-factor, like we were just talking about, if they even offer it at all. So most of them will, however, use something that's transparent to the user. So device identification, kind of like what you were saying about the phone numbers. They'll recognize that the phone number has been called before, so they'll use that as a passive fingerprint detection. Who your ISP is, your location, browser type, etc. However, this creates a problem if you use a VPN or you're trying to actually, be private. Creates large headaches. So a unique browser fingerprint, these are all the things that can go into it. There's a lot more than that, but this is something that your bank might be actually taking and looking at your particular browser and narrowing down to see whether or not it's you. So again, if you're using any of these things that are actually changing, or you're trying to protect your privacy, or for example, like my machine, I have a Linux machine, but anytime I go to a website, it appears as I have a Linux machine and it appears as a Windows machine. So for example, anytime I tend to do something, if they're using some of these methods, they'll say, hey, your system doesn't seem to match up necessarily. So therefore I have to either A, get off my VPN or change what one I'm using, which just creates additional headaches. When in reality, they could just, again, offer something like the time-based passwords. Very simple. So this is where you can find out what things on the web actually have two-factor authentication. First one's the US, the second one's international. GitHub compiles this list daily. So this one's not going to be up to date because I did it back whenever I made this slideshow, but if you go to the websites, they will be. This is what it looks like. So this is the United States one. You can pull backup, sync, banking, cryptocurrencies, crowdfunding, etc. So if you click on any of these categories, I chose the banking one. This is what it will tell you. It will tell you the bank itself, the documentation that you can look for their two factors, whether or not they provide SMS, phone calls, emails, hardware tokens, software tokens. So this list right here, you can look up pretty much any financial institution, any service, and you'll be able to see whether or not they have multi-factor. If they don't, you should request that they do. If you notice, as we start scrolling down, there's going to be red, which pretty much means ask them to support two-factor. This is, again, one of the reasons why I said I honestly have no idea why more companies don't actually implement it, because it's not that hard to do. And it would make everybody more secure. They'd have much less fraud. They'd have much less customer aggravation. Here is one that I pulled up in particular. Robinhood, which is a brokerage, allows you to do TOTP support. So if you actually scroll over whatever the check mark is, you'll have a little pop-up box to see a little more information on them as well. So the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2016 had an Edgar data breach. Hackers stole thousands of corporate documents. The Edgar database is pretty much where corporations file their quarterly reports and everything else. So this was despite 8 years of warning from the GAO. So they had been warning them for 8 years that there were problems in this database, and they didn't do anything about them. Now we're going to move on to investment advisors. The following information is from the North American Securities Administrators Association. 2020 report, because that's the most recent data currently. The North American one, they cover most state advisors. The SEC covers most multi-state advisors. It's actually up to a certain amount of money that goes to them, but that's easy to remember. So 2020 report, 2019 information. This is a state registered statistics as of 2019. So there's 17,533 across the states, 27,000 state registered investment advisors, and then 331 is the average number per jurisdiction. So, quick little facts is that if you are using an investment advisor or a financial planner or anything else like that, most of them are 1 to 2 person shops. That is 80%. 94% of them are investment representatives. And again, the representatives are the individual people. The IRAs is the actual firm themselves. Most of their clients, 82%, are retail investors. And then if you want to read the rest of it, you can see what their services are that they offer and pretty much what it actually is. So, in their examinations, 41 jurisdictions found deficiencies relating to cybersecurity in more than a quarter and up 23% from the 2017 ones. So, deficiencies include no testing of cybersecurity vulnerabilities, lack of procedures regarding securing or limiting your access, lack of procedures related to internet connectivity, weak or infrequently changed passwords, and no or inadequate cybersecurity insurance. And again, these are the people that you are supposed to be protecting or have protecting your financial assets, your financial information. This is another one of those things where you are weak because you're allowing somebody else to take over and be responsible for that security if you're not doing it yourself. So these are just things that you need to be aware of when you are looking for a financial advisor or when you're looking for somebody to give you advice if you're not taking care of it yourself. This is actually a checklist. So they do actually offer checklists so that you can try and cover your bases. Ease of use, functionality, and security. It's the pyramid everybody's used to. You don't really need to use that. This is kind of what the checklist actually looks like. It's actually a pretty solid checklist if anybody actually looks at it. And then they have a confidential data inventory one. So pretty much this discusses what client information is important to me, how do I protect that? And so the important things to do are, again, 80% 1 to 2 person businesses, 19% have 3 to 10 employees. So that is 99% of these businesses have less than 10 employees. Do you share your account or user password with them? Because that's now illegal. And based on lax standards for large businesses who have problems, as we've discussed, do you really think these small outfits who probably do not have anybody on their team for cybersecurity or security in general have potentially even looked at these things or are adequately addressing them? So if you do go to an investment advisor, make sure that you're asking them if they've even seen any of this or if what their standards pretty much are. Oh, that's unfortunate. It just hopped to the end. Close your eyes, everybody. So, are your investments safe? No, they're not. Inflation alone reduces your yearly value. This presentation completely disregards whether or not your investments are actually doing well or not. And the lax or non-existent security implementations from the large to the very small organizations are problems all across the board. So, what can we do? Don't provide info that you don't need to, period. Doctors, dentists, et cetera, ask for social security numbers. They don't actually need that to do your billing for the most part. That's just something that has become widely accepted for when somebody wants to verify identification, that's what they ask for. It's not a requirement, it's not necessary. Get a passport card, which doesn't actually have certain information on it. And the reason you want to get a passport card as opposed to a driver's license necessarily is because there's a barcode on the back of the passport cards that will not actually scan. So although when you present it to people, they'll think that it's a driver's license because especially the scan, people take your driver's license, you go to a bar or you go out to something and people want to see your identification. If you hand them your driver's license and they scan it into anything, that information is probably being stored. And now that information, your driver's license, where you live, et cetera, is all being stored on whatever that device is that I guarantee you is absolutely terrible. Because I met somebody who created one of those for a very large chain, and the security implementation was practically non-existent. Yeah. So it wasn't a matter of if they were going to get their information stolen, it was a matter of when for that one, and it was not a high bar.
You could just scratch the back.
You could do that too.
I was pulling it out a lot.
Yeah. Or just cut it in half and just present it to them that way. Yeah, there you go. So check which of your financial institutions actually have enabled MFA. And if they don't, ask them to. And if they do, definitely enable it. And the other problem is if they are refusing to do this, maybe you want to consider moving to a different service. Because the reality is the companies who are very lax in their security standards, that is a company culture. That's something that is going to happen. At some point, they are going to be breached, and any information that you have with them is going to be public. So you cannot completely get rid of risks. You can only reduce them down to a sustainable level. You have to assume that whenever you're giving your information out to somebody, more or less, at some point, it's going to be exposed. That's why limiting your information in the beginning is so important. And then ask small businesses if they actually adhere to the checklist, if they've seen it. And you can also do this not just for like your financial planners, but any business that you interact with regularly, ask them what their security controls are. Ask them if they even have any in place. You got some value out of this and you want to reciprocate it, become a wealthy client. I can pen test your organization, set up an enterprise talk, hire me for staff training, take my advanced privacy course. Closing points. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. Use free and open source software, tell everybody, and if you want the slides. And now we're going to open for questions. All across the board, you guys can ask me anything you want, cybersecurity, financial stuff, anything. No questions at all.